awareness, my political awareness about things has got a lot to do with my own experiences. Um, and I always tell people I don't want to miss what would be considered one of my greatest lessons one day. When people forget that up until the mid 70s, people used to be hounded for having a dompas on them. And I remember being a very small 9-year-old standing with my mother, protecting somebody who the police was chasing. And I find that was for me a very important political moment. I was very young at that time, although very politically aware still, but very young in taking action. And I think that is what I believe makes my difference. I'm not so much somebody who in my earlier life would spend time in theories and reading, but I was very much one who believed that we need to take action. So let me leave it there for now.
Yes. I know you've been an activist, social activist. We have mutual friends in the land space. Tell us also a bit about your organizations that you were involved and this notion of no peace without justice. I like that, but then when you explain to the listeners
So I've been living in many ways sometimes a double and triple life. So you have a working life as the one that pays the bills, and so I didn't do too well at the university in my first round, meaning so 1985, 1986, went to UCT, loved the idea of throwing stones and burning tires and things like that. And so that didn't help in completing the degree. And then with a few activists at the time, we had formed what is today still running called the Mustada Film Foundation. And Mustada Film Foundation was started very much as a project of the Qibla movement, but was also a response to the violence that occurred in Crossroads at the time. I don't know if people still remember comrades in Windhoek fighting with each other and people being forcibly or internally displaced from Crossroads. And Mustada Film started its work at that particular level. And so myself and members of the Qibla movement were more involved in that aspect of our work, were very much involved in the distribution of food. And then we, because of the team and the doctor, we did some primary health care and things like that. At that same time, some of our members had gone into exile. And between discussions of them being based in Zimbabwe and ourselves, we formed what was established as our first, let's call it, iteration of the then called the Shaheed Imam Abdullah Haron Foundation. And this foundation had a very interesting advisory board, and included people such as Dr. Neville Alexander, people like Tumuleng Musala, and then people like Imam Rashid Umar, Farid Sayed, and of course Professor Muhammad Haroon and so forth. Interestingly, that time we weren't so very specific about making sure that we have race and gender balance. I think we were more interested in making sure we have representation from across the political spectrum. So those were earlier ones. And then, of course, during that time, I had spent quite a bit of time because of my both, and I could leave the country in and out and go to Zimbabwe, and they were not the wiser who I was. And so I spent quite a bit of time making contact, supporting our people out in exile and seeing what they need. This is also a time where my relationship with particularly the Pan-Africanist Congress and the Azanian People's Liberation Organization deepened. I had the opportunity of meeting the commander of APLA, Sabelo Pama, on a very special day, which is the day in which his 2 sons were born. Sadly, like Rasani, they were killed. I can't even call it at the dawn of our new democracy. I think they were killed deliberately before our democracy, because certainly these were comrades who would have wanted to make sure that our people got the best. And so then I found myself now going back to university, doing a social work degree because we needed to build the country. After that, I got employment at the Equal Opportunity Foundation. And so my life in the NGO sector, post Mustarafin and then Imam Haron Foundation, meant that we now got paid for our work. I like the idea then of stepping beyond the borders of the Greater Cape Town. And in my job then, I got to go into many of the rural areas of South Africa to be able to actually get a full appreciation of what our challenges were. And that continued to be my path for many years in different bodies, different organizations, different sectors as well.
Okay. Let's come to outside Imam Haron, Abdullah Haron, a legend, a figurehead. I mean, I was young when I heard of my father go to the Janaza. And how, I'm sure everybody knows, but just give a background of this man and the time.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, like yourselves, we heard and learned and felt the presence of Imam Haron before we ever read about him. And so the reason I mentioned the woman with the dompas and being in front between ourselves and the police is because we know that there was an imam who acted in that particular way. The idea of doing work in the social welfare area, Mustarafin as an organization, going into a Black African township, and particularly at the time when there's violence, is an example of Imam Haron. But let me take you right back to him. He was born in 1924. He went at a very early age in his life to go and study in Makkah. His aunt took him there. His early studies was interrupted in 1939 with the start of the Second World War, and all foreign students were sent home at the time. What is interesting then is, despite being a very young man at the time, the head of the college asked, "What will you people do when you go home? You have now learned some things about religion. How are you going to, what you're going to do?" So some said they'll build a madrasa, others said I'll be building a mosque. And Imam Haron said, "Well, I come from a poor family. The only thing I will do is I will fast Mondays and Thursdays." And this built his fortitude and his strength. Upon his return, he continued to work in his father's shop and things like that. But he also further
educated in the Roundtree at some stage.
Yeah, so that comes a little bit later. But then he also started to learn at further his Islamic studies by various sheikhs in Cape Town, until in 1955 there was an opportunity. They were looking for a young imam, and so he, despite the opposition of many people, got this job. So at 33 years old, a very youthful person got involved in the Claremont, in the Steegman Road Mosque in Claremont. And one of the challenges that they had was sometimes a very divided community. And back in the day, people used to talk Indians and Malays and things like that. But there was also generational, older people and younger people. And Imam brought a particular spirit, a welcome environment for everybody. And so whatever differences people may have had, he was able to bring people together. The other thing that existed also was apartheid in many ways was a very successful project in keeping people apart.
Till today?
Until today, it continues. And what's interesting is that Imam had earlier on already started his work in reaching out to people in the Black African townships of Langa, Nyanga, and Guguletu, which was the only ones that were there around at the time. And Al Jamia Masjid also became a place where people who came from the townships were welcomed. Not just because other mosques never kept anybody away, but this was the mosque that they knew the imam who came to them first. Okay, and so they felt at ease with him, and that became a very non-racial base for people to operate.
So he brought in almost that liberation theology, even before we termed it as that.
Yeah,
because the dean was meant to deal with injustices, and he also this notion of the solidarity between the groups, the African and colored communities, and in this time where you still have Muslims that only practice the deen. They pray 5 times a day, but they don't care. They don't care for their fellow brothers. They don't deal with issues of oppression and exploitation. His message is still resonating now with
also very, very much. But he becomes significant in South African history because he is a pioneer in the space. I know one of the things that we find is that sometimes ideas have very serious people driving it. And sometimes people have difficulty getting their head around what is this political theory and what is this idea and so forth. Imam found interesting ways in getting people involved. So one of the things, for example, you said had study material. In the old days, you used to have this cyclist. They had some chapters of 31 people of Islamic, social nature, political nature. So one of the books that was some ago is considered good working class literature. A book called the Jagged Trousered Philanthropist. So
Jagged Trousered
Philanthropist. I'll send you the book.
Okay.
And anybody else that wants it also. But what it is a way that tells you this is a man who could find interesting ways to draw people in. And one of the other things was, I certainly, I don't know if it was in your case, but in mine as well, we went to mosques where religion is a very serious thing and very old people sit in front.
Yeah.
And the young people must be quiet at the back and so forth. And so what Imam did was he said, during the month of Ramadan, after Taraweeh, he tell young boys, okay, I want you to prepare a speech on what? Whatever they will try, you understand? And so young people got the confidence to be able to speak and see the mosque and see the front part and the pulpit. There's a space for them as well. And so his mobilizing was something that was very simple, ordinary, but something that was very inviting. And so people started to really gravitate around him. And so one of the more formal structures that he led was the establishment of the Clement Muslim Youth Association. And they had a little newspaper called the Islamic Mirror, of which, of course, he was the main ideologue behind it or whatever. But again, from our young days, we know that around the newspaper, putting it together, getting the stories, whatever, more importantly, learning the skills about putting it together, became many massive things. And what else, the other interesting thing, again, a groundbreaker was, so not only did he have classes for women, but as Auntie Sharifa Davids, wife of Imam Ibrahim Davids, was still alive and still with us, told us, Imam would come to the class and said, okay, vandaag sit ek agter. And so I want to hear what you have to say, So we would couch that, for example, in Freudian terminology and say conscientization and alles. The Imam had it net gedoen, And so people felt that this is somebody that makes a space for them and almost demystifies not just religion, but activism as well. And so all of these things let's call it on the home front, he ticked all those boxes. And beyond what was the norm in society then. But then what Imam did was, so where else is active? So you had at that time something called the Colored People's Congress. You had progressive white liberals like Zach de Beer.
Congress of Democrats.
Yeah. So people like Albie Saxon and people. But at the same time, you also had people like Robert Sobukwe. Understand? And so and more importantly, within that greater Clement area, you had members of the Unity Movement, the Teachers League of South Africa, and his students were people who attended at the High School of Livingston. And they had a character like R.O. Dudley and Ali Fatah and things like that. Today, it is interesting that we need to almost rekindle that idea of mobilizing and connecting with progressive forces. And what has happened is we have so advanced only our interests that we cannot see allies. We cannot see other progressives alongside us. We are more interested interested in pointing out our differences
And seeing
the-
our similarities.
and seeing our similarities. And so Imam did that, you understand? And so what that meant was that the sense of a movement against apartheid took shape. So here we had a period before you have the formal ideas like the National Forum in the Black Consciousness set, or the United
The period
Democratic.
that you're talking about now is the late 60s.
So from early 60s already,
Yeah.
you understand? And so what's exciting is that there's no formal name to these types of things, but here's a personality who drives it. You understand? And people feel that with him, through him, you can do things. But he doesn't stand out as a vociferous only individual. He's always part of a collective, you know. And they say that the most very pointed, specific speech he ever gave was its condemnation of the Group Areas Act in 1955. And so he spoke at the drill hall, and he called basically, in his words, an act of inhumanity, and it's something that's haram and against Islam and lots of other interesting things, which in the 1970s became known as the crime against humanity that was apartheid. You understand? But this idea, this collective, this working with others, this but who's against the enemy, and a very clear idea who the enemy is. And today, again, our challenge is we cannot even define poverty as the enemy. We try and make poverty understandable here and there. And unless we are able to be clear about the enemy, you know, and as Neville Alexander was always reminding me, say, you know, you mustn't only know what you're fighting for, but what you're fighting against. You understand? And Imam taught those sort of things.
Okay, let's explore those. You raised many issues. Cassiem was my teacher.
And my wife.
And I used to go to Garlandale Madrasa.
Same.
So, and fast forward, but so clearly Imam was a pioneer of his time. Theoretically advanced, he mobilized, he brought people together, he talked about a coalition of the progressives, a movement of bringing people together. Before his time, also accommodating women, you know, in Islam, and all of those things. Fast forward,
and making space for particularly the most marginalized people from within the African township. That was his biggest drive. Nobody's reaching them, and he breaks that barrier. And up until today, especially here in Greater Cape Town, we have not broken that barrier sufficiently.
So that is also the theme of then and now, because today we need more that solidarity, that sense of Capetonians, because he did that. He saw the Ubuntu, the humanist in everybody. And so how does our deen even now prescribe us to not turn a blind eye? Because you have a tale of two cities in South Africa, in Cape Town today. You still have race, religion, all of these other class, gender, still happening now in our city. And the divide and rule theology that is alive and well, and the othering, and the fight for scarce resources is still there. Even though we have a good, almost template from the Imam. What are the type of lessons that this generation must emulate from him?
Yeah. You see, so one of the things is to step outside our comfort zone. And one of the things that was really interesting, one could almost think that it was a side theme that both Shamila and Muhammad were speaking about the father on day 4 of the inquest. You know, Shamila said, you know, my father used to come home and he said, Lima, do you have any money? And the strange thing about it is that the reason he had to ask her for money to help with things, she was a seamstress, meaning she had her own income and things like that, is because my father would have given out all his own money before he came home. Okay, so this act of selflessness, always making sure somebody else has. This is that sense of generosity. Today, in anything that is being done, and the most politically conscious comrades we have, one of the things that are watching it for me, you understand, oh, he wants me to get involved with it, but he's covered. What's in it for me? Understand? Now, see, there was a generation of people in the time of Imam Harun, but Imam, as a leader within that space, is that he was more interested in what's in it for you. You understand? And so one of the things that was very, very troubling for him was that in order for this society to move, we need to invest in the education of our young people, in training our young people. And so this became one of his passions, is to send young people abroad to go and study. You know? And even his own daughter he sent. And yesterday, was it Wednesday, when I came from court and I was walking with Dr. Soru Solomon, was one of the young people that he had actually sent to Cairo to go and study.
Wow. So one of them actually testified.
Yeah. No, he didn't testify. He was there with us in the court. But he's very well known as a person that Imam, and like that Imam has seen many people. Now there was no reason why Imam recite with me in the mosque. It's all right. Let's take it like Imam, I have a problem. Okay, I'm going to dua for you. No, Imam was not just about the dua level, which is fine. But how can we solve your problem?
Yeah.
You know, so that selflessness is what we need today. Understand? Today, unfortunately, we have leaders who will say, well, is anybody looking after my child first? Understand? No, everybody else, every child was Imam's child. And I think this is why, particularly people in the Clement community, miss him so much. And so, 50 odd years later, Imam Ismail David's stepson wrote a book where he went to go and interview people, short stories about it. A friend of mine, and where they relate the experiences with Imam Haron. A friend of mine said, till into the early 80s, people used to come early on a Friday to Al Jamia Mosque. They came from all the areas that they were dispersed to. Menenberg was a particular, and so they come and perform Jummah there, but they want to tell you things like, I dreamt about Imam last night. You understand? So how can what was it that this person did in his selflessness that he touched the people so much? And that's what we need to do today. We need to step outside of ourselves.
Yeah, my granny was talking the other day, she's 93, about the killer that happened when he passed on.
Yeah.
And the day that his janazah was. So there was also almost supernatural. People felt that. People felt that it was one of the biggest janazahs ever. I'm not sure if my uncle had showed me him as a 5-year-old. Uncle Rashad showed me as a 5-year-old picture in Muslim news where his father carried him at that janazah. So it's like the Kirsani killings. Everybody of that generation remembers where they were and how they felt when Imam passed on.
Yeah.
So this week has been very significant. The inquest has opened finally. Before we go about the week's, what happened in this week, why has it taken so long? And what has happened or what didn't happen before the inquest?
Okay. So by immediately after 94, there was this whole discussion that we should have some sort of truth and reconciliation event. There was, and formally the Truth and Reconciliation Act was passed, and commissioners were appointed, and of course it was led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Alex Borain and so forth. And there was a belief that through this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that South Africa will take a new path, there will be a new trajectory. But what it required for people to do was whoever was a perpetrator of any act of violence had to come and make a full disclosure of what had actually happened and then apply for amnesty. And then people who were victims were allowed to come and explain what had happened to them. And attached to all of that was an investigating unit, and people would try and find information and see how those things were resolved. This was early 90s South Africa, which meant that the sunset clauses had kept all the security persons in their own place. Documents were still in their hand. In many ways, the security establishment of apartheid was still very much in place. And so they were not going to cooperate with any unit to work in any manner that would compromise them. And so the TRC in many ways was very much a voluntary participation, and where they could subpoena people, they did. And then there would have been, there were in many cases legal challenges. No, I don't want to go. It's not my, you can't make me do this, that, and the other. So it's stressed out the entire process. The TRC concluded by referring 300 cases to the Ministry of Justice to pursue further. Then later on, the National Prosecuting Authority was appointed. The cases were transferred to them. And these were cases where definitely there were deaths, murders, things that needed further investigation, and most importantly, prosecution. By that time, many of the perpetrators were still very much around or whatever. But just as much as the security establishment were in place, the judicial establishment were also in place. So people were sitting in key positions, and I think in the movies they call it file 13.
Yeah.
Just disappears. It takes long and so forth and whatever. And even very high-profile cases like that of Steve Biko and so forth, many of these things were just shoved and shunned. And people's attempts to advance things, despite having gone to the TRC, never ever gained any further traction. Until one young man decided that enough is enough, and he is our friend in Kaji, and he persisted and pursued whatever. And then with the assistance of the Foundation for Human Rights and many other parties, they eventually got the opportunity to get their matter to the desk of the NPA, and during the presidency of Jacob Zuma. And what then happened was that a date was set and the matter went to court. And the Imtiaz Kaji, of course, is the nephew of Ahmad Timur, and many lessons were learned through that entire process, which we'll talk about through that. But immediately following that, almost on a very regular basis, Imtiaz got calls and people asking what about my father, my brother, my sister that got killed and so forth. And at the same time, the Foundation for Human Rights also got that type of request, can you help us with our cases? Now, on the Foundation for Human Rights, for a very long time, was Yasmin Suka. She herself was a member of the TRC. But come around 2018, by this time, Judge Siraj Desai was the deputy chairperson also, and he advances this idea also of taking the matter of Imam Haron forward. And he had told me that one of the things that motivated him personally, I'm sure he followed it from very young, and like a Capetonian like ourselves, he felt the need to have justice for Imam Haron, but more specifically for him, that his professional mentor and also political mentor, Benny Keys, was junior counsel during the inquest at the time. And Benny Keys, of course, one of the great thinkers of our country, but also a brilliant legal mind, felt that this was a clear-cut case and the state fudged it in such a horrific manner that we always felt that this matter needs to be addressed. So Siraj speaks to Auntie Halima, and the late wife of Imam Abdullah Haron, and she says, and he has this discussion that, look, you know what, there's resources, and we'll speak about the resources in a minute, but we want to take this forward. Like, are you ready? You know, and so like he repeats, she said, as good as you say. So that was her approval. And this is really what was needed. What then happened was, and I'll take you through the steps and tell you what happens for many of the other cases as well. So the Foundation for Human Rights then works in collaboration with a law firm, and particularly the pro bono section. The law firm is called Weber Wenzel, and they then put together a brief, some information that they have. The brief basically says, here's this man, this is his name, this is where he lived, this is how he died. The concern for us is cause of death, and was anybody culpable for that? Here's additional information. So of the information they had was the 1970 inquest document, the post-mortem, and also in that package, of course, is things that have been written by Muhammad Haron, his sons, but more particularly also the book called The Killing of the Imam. And so all of that becomes a package. So Weber Wenzel puts together, and the brief is then addressed to the provincial office of the National Prosecuting Authority. Now, here's where things become interesting. So they send it to, at that time, to National Prosecuting Authority, which is in the Western Cape, headed by Rodney de Kock. And I said, I promise you, Faiz, that there are tidbits of what I followed, which I can say is my insights and interventions that I had hoped. I don't claim that that was in itself the motivation that moved things along. But your former colleague, Hisham Mohammed, the late Hisham Mohammed, took an active interest also in this announcement that the family made on the 8th of February 2019 that it wants to see the inquest reopened. So he was always asking me what to do. And I said, you know what, Hisham, what I need is that brief to be looked at that is on Rodney de Kock's desk. Somewhere it's there, you understand? I'm sure he got it. Maybe it was there a few days, whatever. I said, Hisham, I just wanted to look at it quickly, you understand? And basically what I did was to say, Hisham is interested. Hisham was from Justice Portfolio Committee. He came from the Department of Justice. What can he do? You understand? And so it is my understanding Hisham has passed on now, and I'm not putting any pressure on Rodney de Kock to admit to anything or whatever, but Hisham contacted Rodney, and Rodney looked at the documents and said, here is a case to be made. And then what followed from that, which I think at the time we also then communicated back to Weber Wenzel, that I think this was around December 2019. So as far as these types of cases go, turnaround was fantastic. Okay, so things started happening beginning of late 2018, beginning of 2019. Document gets written, end of the year, everything is ready. There's a case to be made, and so the next phase, which is a very interesting phase, the NPA now has the document with all the relevant information on the meaning. Who else did Swaker threaten? We need to know if any of the security policemen is alive. Everything to build a case, to build a information package which will be presented in front of a judge as we're seeing this. But it needed to go to the police whose task it is to do the investigation. And lo and behold, the decision somewhere is made that it should go to the desk of our comrade Major General Jeremy Vieri. And really what excited us at the time was it was him, and not just another professional policeman. I have no qualms with professional policemen. I will tell you a bit about them as we go along. But what was exciting is that when the matter landed on his desk, and the energy he infused in the police about the matter, and the directives and suggestions he gave and so forth, was something that made people feel that this is something serious. This is
and
something
for now, for change, the system is going to work.
Yeah,
and his immeasurable contribution in that.
Yeah, and so I am keeping him updated about the progress. I feel that in his own way, he has made his bit of a contribution. Yeah, so he had appointed somebody who retired, and somebody else took over and they retired. And then the matter landed up with the current investigating officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dion Peterson. And I want to take my hat off for this man, for his dedication, but more importantly, for his professionalism. The challenge that he had was that information came to him around August 2020. And 2020 became the year of COVID. And so over and above the fact that people would be stonewalling in these types of investigation, in any way, he had COVID on top of it, you understand? But what was really exciting about police and even members of the NPA that we had met for some of the other cases is that So you either represent the family or bring family members around or whatever. The doors is open. They want to speak. Give us advice, guide us. Is it something we are missing? As opposed to dealing with an establishment that believes they have all the answers and you should just wait until they're done. Understand? And we, everywhere along the route, we just felt, for example, things are going a bit slow. I want to just go and scream and throw my toys out there and so forth. And I'm not just talking about the Harun method, I'm talking about some of the other families as well, of which you are very much aware. It was really interesting to see how, with understanding, they listened to us. And one of the other things that I think is what we must not miss is, every country has people who can be difficult and we want to work against the democracy that we want to establish or whatever. But if our attitude and our way is to be able to say, we are meeting as compatriots, we are meeting as people wanting to build a nation, you will see people open up and be able to assist and advance. And they all have a little story. You just told me about the story. I went to the madrasa of Sip in Garlandale. We met a senior person, I won't mention names, senior person in the NPA who said he was the teacher at Kafala Primary School and he was the teacher in charge of school sports. And I was a runner and now I am in the NPA. So we would never have been able to connect. So almost their loyalty to SIP, and how good a person SIP was. And so whatever SIP imbibed from the love of teaching and being taught by Imam Haron, he had for many years transferred that to his students. So that the student of his says, I'm in the NPA team. I'm ready. You understand? But if we close ourselves, if we believe that we have all the answers and only we can do things, we will not meet these people. So there's always the intellect and there's the heart, and more than that, there's the spirit. But if we open up, things move. And so COVID slowed things a bit, but during this time, Dion Peterson was able to do interesting things. So one of the things you have to do is you have to find out whichever name you found in any document, is anybody still alive? So whether you call him a victim or perpetrator, anybody that's alive, right? And so you found most of the people, I would believe. I do think that there may have been a challenge, and I'm sure that the judge will say to check on any medical personnel that may still be alive. But there is the process of checking still going on. But he has found everybody within the police force and found that got the personnel numbers or the staff numbers, let's call it that. And then went to check for their records within police. But then what he did was he went to go and check at Home Affairs. When were they born? When did they die? And are they really dead? And so forth. And he went even further and said, you know what? Because this is a part of it. I said, well, these are the critical characters, right? Can you try and track any of their family members? So if I'm not mistaken, he did track one of the families of the two perpetrators, somebody living in George somewhere, whatever. These people are under no obligation to participate. They were not the perpetrators, but the idea was that should they have something, maybe an old notebook or anything like that. And that was the extent to which he had gone. You understand? And so it was not surprising that the lawyer for the family noted firstly that he said, I want to note that you almost left no stone unturned in this matter. But so Serika Manali, you understand? He had an assistant who worked on some of the other cases, and that assistant went to the National Archives for other matters, and to save money and time, what he did was he said to him, now, bring alles, copy anything and everything the National Archives would allow you to do on the Imam Haron matter as well. So any documents of which there may have been a copy or half the stuff, he brought that from the National Archives. We are of the view that there may be, even on the Imam Haron matter, intelligence reports or things that the let's call them what they were, the enemy is still keeping hidden. I'm not in any way of the view that everything has been revealed, and I'm not of the view that all files have been destroyed. The Imam traveled to Egypt, Imam traveled to Saudi Arabia, Imam traveled to the UK. The Imam was threatened during interrogation, and it was told our foreign intelligence is very strong. Question is, where's the records of foreign intelligence? Where was it kept? Was it kept, for example, in the embassy in London? Or is there something somewhere? So that information is still to be pursued. But we came to a point where all the documents were in place. And then the last phase, so he verified everything as the police. He then put his information to the NPA, and they then sat with the family lawyers, and then the NPA makes an appeal to Minister of Justice, Minister Lamola, and Minister Lamola then says, okay, if based on what you say, I think I will now ask the judge president in the Western Cape to appoint a judge and the date be set. Okay. Now, let me tell you the parts in between. So remember, we're talking 2019, 2020, things are going slow and not as good as we want to. And so we sit with our phones and we say, okay, who can we help? Who can help us? Who can move things? If not on this matter, on that matter. And as we're moving along, we're also learning the landscape. So the landscape is there's the police, there is the NPA, there's politicians, there's the Ministry of Justice. And how do you navigate through some of these things? But on the 8th of February 2019, when we had this, and when I say we, meaning the foundation or the family at the time, and the foundation wasn't even properly established, the family had invited other families to a joint press conference. I think you were there, but we had so many. It was just after the day of opening of Parliament, so many people were still in Cape Town, but a wide range of people came, including the then TSG of the ANC, Jesse Duarte. And so I know Jesse's brothers. I didn't know Jesse that well, and from my stay in Joburg, whatever, but it's just anything you need. That's it all. Okay. And then one day I'm stuck, and I said, you know what? I need some help to push things along. And so WhatsApp, not even a phone call, WhatsApp. Comrade Jesse, this is Cassiem. We need help with some things, whatever. What Comrade Jesse does, she says, okay, comrade. Within the day, Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffries, phones me. I'm lying on my bed inside. Hi, Cassiem, this is John Jeffries. Like, he's dying. He says, no, Comrade Jesse phoned me, and she said, I must speak to you. So he gives things from his point, what slows things down, who's who, how do we understand things, whatever. But what was important for me more than what he said was that here is somebody who must have had a very busy life, such as Comrade Jesse, but she knows the importance of this thing. I am not a member of the African National Congress. I'm not involved politically in any political party in any meaningful way. I am not known to anybody. She was not listening to who I am. She was, what is your problem that you're working with? And why this is of critical nature for the advancement of our country. And she responded to me. And that's what we want to see from anybody at any level of office. What is the seriousness and what can I do? I'm in the right place. And she moved things for me, okay? And so I really very much appreciate that without having long chats with her. She just knew what needed to be done. Now, let me take you to a second story about her, which I think if we talk about nothing else and forget anything else in this, is to be able to see the critical nature of interventions, okay? So somewhere along the way, out of lots of other pressure, a new NPA head is appointed. Of course, she needs to do things she wants, and there's a lot of pressure in terms of saying, you know what, you need to move on these TRC cases and things. And say, yes, of course we'll do that. And meets with her counterpart in the walks, and yes, we will do this. And of course, and now they're scrambling all over the country. But Lieutenant Colonel Peterson was not attached to the walks. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson was attached to the Western Cape Police, to a special unit that deals with cold cases or anything relating from the TRC. She's here in the Western Cape. And so I get this phone call one day, and I'm told that, you know what, the guy from Pretoria is taking over here in the Cape. You understand? Now, both parties, I had met some of these investigating officers, very nice people, very hardworking people, but they didn't meet. These other two were appointed by the province. And so it becomes almost like a turf thing, you know. For the colleagues involved at that level, for them it was just, okay, well, here's the file, do this. There's no animosity between them. But the person at the NPA was very much aware that if Colonel Peterson had to put that file down, what would happen is the other guy comes and it starts all over again. That means over a year of heavy lost or whatever. And so, frantically, now what are we going to do? I said, no, let me see what I can do. You understand? Back on the phone with Comrade Jesse. And my words as a lay person in the way the world and government works is, Comrade Jesse, can you tell the Minister of Police to tell the provincial whatever that they must just keep him on in the job or whatever. A couple of hours later, the person from the NPA says, everything is back to normal. What did you do? Huh? So I never had the opportunity to ask Comrade Jesse, did you actually do this? Whatever. But that is the only person that I informed. Right? And so I will continue to believe and pray for her that it was she who intervened. And this is something that we must appreciate, no matter the political party difference or whatever. This is what I was talking about earlier, progressive forces. Working together to make the country better, to address issues of justice together. We must have, and we will always have, our ideological differences, our priorities differences, whatever. But when we see that there's something to be done, we need people like Comrade Jesse to act.
I appreciate what you're saying, and my experience also as a provincial secretary working with her. We miss her much, and there's many of us that emulate her legacy and history. And you're right that we need that type of servant leaders, and she was that person. No nonsense, just get the job done. And she used to do this. She used to do it as a matter of course. And your point about working together, the progressive forces, unity amongst our people, is critical points. Thanks for the overview of how did we get to this point. So Monday, the start of the inquest, we get lost in the High Court, and it's Court 20 downstairs, and the judge opens very profound words. Maybe you can share what I took out of that was this concept of Toba. Maybe just explain to the viewers the start of the inquest this week and the significance thereof.
So, like from what you can hear, you can hear that there was lots of things that I've been involved with. But then earlier in the year, I decided to change a bit of direction, go and do some study. And so for months, I'd actually left these things behind. Monday morning is like the first day on the job. I'm having butterflies and what to do, whatever. But I don't know what's going to happen. I've heard a few things, good things about Justice Tulari, but I don't know him. I don't know what the process is going to be. And so what concerns me then is what's next. And so what calms us is his opening words, you know. I know we don't have much time, but I would like
please.
In fact, let's do this because this is broadcasted on social media. I'm going to forward you my article. Then on there is Justice Tulari's exact words. But what he does is he recognizes and talks to a Muslim community and talking to a community that has a process of justice. And he quotes a colleague of his who told them about why justice is so important. And then he uses a word called Tawbah. And Tawbah, many people roughly translate as forgiveness. And he says that his colleague explained, and because he used the Arabic word Tawbah, I think people were sitting up straight, Yeah, but it is a profound Islamic concept. It's not just an Arabic word, it's a concept Islam brought. And it says to set the balance straight again. So that means for generations, the Muslims of the Cape, and particularly people in South Africa that have struggled against apartheid, knew that the balance is being disturbed. And Justice Tulari says, I want to remind you of this word, that we are here to set that balance right in society. And I think that is what is given encouragement for the week to come. And so let me just roughly end by saying, this week there was testimonies by professionals, aeronautical experts, forensic specialists, people, and I want to emphasize this. In the time of Imam Haron's first inquest, the magistrate was white Afrikaner, the prosecutor was white Afrikaner, the policemen were white Afrikaner, all men, okay? Their case and what they put forward, that Imam fell down the stairs, the concoction, their lies, the collusion was destroyed by an Indian man, by a black African woman, forensic pathologist, specialist, teacher at university, okay? And they, in their wildest dreams, they could never ever have imagined then that a black African woman would hold up their information in court and saying, you even taught this in a textbook, and you contradicting yourself. And so Imam was vindicated, and so was everybody else. And even before there is a final judgment by a black African judge, okay, before there is a final judgment, just the process of the inquest is already a victory. Because that is what the Afrikaner nationalists or the apartheid wanted to prevent. They wanted to prevent black people to fully find themselves. They believed they had all the answers and that we were supposed to just work in their gardens and tea boys and things like that. So Comrade is really, it has been a educational experience, a historic experience. And for everybody that is viewing this, I want to tell you, for the 5 days to come, make your way to court number 20. The court was chosen specifically because it's the biggest courtroom, and we want to see all of you come in for half an hour. I know parking is expensive in Cape Town. Come in for half an hour. If you're there during a tea break, lunch break, just come, even if it is just to greet the family and say, we are here with you. That's what we want. But come and show your solidarity. We have now had enough of keyboard warriors and sitting at home. We want people to come out to share your humanity with everybody in the court. So come. And there's no such thing as Imam was Muslim, I can't come. Imam was for everybody. Right? And this is an issue of national importance, and people who feel themselves progressive must feel themselves welcome to come.
I want us to leave it there, and for that profound sense, I also want to encourage people to come to court. This week has been a tumultuous week. Family is there, and I was there, but I also want to encourage, like you saying, this message of solidarity, of hope, that despite all this time, despite all that has happened, there is light. You see the common humanity, you see the synchronicity, you see the interfaith between faith and action and hope and opportunity and possibilities in those dark times where the Toba, the rebalance is coming. And also, a lot of people will say, why are you opening up old wounds? Why is it that you want to harp on the past? We must remember those past so that we can also address the festering wounds of our current reality. Just your last parting shots from
so there is an imbalance in our society today. Many people believe that things are terrible right now, and we agree things are terrible. But they continue to be in that way because we have not set things straight right at the beginning. there are martyrs whose blood needs to be avenged in the way that we need to know what the truth is. Okay? And so I encourage people to say that let's consider this as a reset moment. And I know there's a full generation of people who do not understand what apartheid was.
Yes.
And so we want you to come and hear the brutality of apartheid. And I'm going to give you one example. And I want you to think of a loved one of your own. If this person who you love, for example, as a father, mother, brother, sister, whatever, if they were unjustly arrested, held for 123 days, and then there's a knock on the door and they tell you, come and fetch the body. Now, when you go and fetch the body, I want you people to remember this. This is what the family and friends of Imam Haron were met with. His naked body was put at the mortuary, and on top of it was two other bodies dumped on top of his. And so they had to take his body out, and they found his bruised and battered body. Now, this man, as I told you right at the beginning, right in front, had loved his community, had served his people, had loved his family, and this is the way in which the apartheid government treated him. Now, if you ever doubt what the apartheid government's brutality was, I want you to come to court, come and learn about this. And really, then we must also ask ourselves, how far have we come? I would still like to believe we are still in the starting. It is too long. There's lots to be fixed, but we don't, and we can never ever go back to that brutality of a system that told us we are less than human beings and they can do with us what they want. That will never ever happen again.
Shukran. Shukran, everybody. Thanks for listening, and that has been our podcast. On that note, no retreat, no surrender. We must fight the injustice wherever we find it ourselves. We must remember never to forget. We must deal with the jihad of poverty and our struggle for liberation, especially the economy. And we must still remind ourselves of our common humanity. So come to the court. Let's remember where we come from so that these things can help us change our future. Shukran, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.